Hello, dear students. Today we are going to learn The Sign of the Four novel by Sir Ignatius Conan Doyle. He is the author, and this lecture is being given to you by your English teacher, Mr. Evitere, DPG College, Chiploon. Before turning towards our story, The Sign of Four, a short introduction of Sir Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle. Born in 22nd May 1859, 7th, died in 7th July 1930, was a British writer who created the character Sherlock Holmes. Originally a physician in 1887, he published A Study in Scarlet, the first of four novels and more than 50 short stories about Holmes and Dr. Watson. The Sherlock Holmes stories are generally considered milestones in the field of crime fiction. Doyle was a prolific writer. Other than Holmes' stories, his works include fantasy and science fiction. Stories about Professor Challenger and humorous stories about the Napoleonic soldier Brigadier Gerard, as well as plays, romances, poetry, non-fiction, and historical novels. One of Doyle's early short stories, J. Habakkuk, jo- Jefferson's statement, helped to popularize the mystery of the Mary Celeste. The Sign of Four is the second novel of Arthur Conan Doyle, in which Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson solve the mystery of the hidden treasure and murderer. This was the short introduction of Arthur and students. Now you are going to see the short summary after this plot summary. The Sign of the Four is the second novel by Arthur Conan Doyle about master detective Sherlock Holmes and his partner Dr. John Watson. In his story, they solve a mystery of hidden treasure and murderer. Part of English literature, The Sign of the Four. The Sign of the Four plot summary. The Sign of the Four is the second Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes novels. In it, the detective and his companion, Dr. Watson, unravel a mystery of hidden treasure and murder. Miss Mary Morrison arrives at 221B Baker Street to request help with the mystery of her missing father. Her anonymous gifts of pearls and a letter requesting her to meet an unknown person that evening. Holmes takes on her case and the adventure begins. Watson narrates the tale that sees the detective tracking down hidden treasure and murderers. By the end of the story, the criminals are either dead or arrested, and Miss Mary Marston and Watson are engaged to be. Here are some pictures just to see here. Mary brings Sherlock the mystery of her missing father. Mary's father had died after finding treasure in India. Sholto's brother finds the treasure, but it is stolen and is killed. Next picture, Sherlock tracks down the thieves. They find the treasure chest empty. Watson and Mary get engaged. It means that what here are engaged to be husband and wife. Miss Mary Watson arrives and asks for help with a mystery. Holmes and Watson accompany her to Thaddeus Sholto's house and learn about the Agra treasure. Bartholomew Sholto is found dead at Pondicherry Lodge. Holmes investigates and the clues and calls the police. Athelney Jones arrests Thaddeus Sholto. Holmes sends Watson to borrow Toby the dog. Holmes employs the Baker Street irregulars as spies and eventually puts on a disguise to track down the Aurora launch. Watson, Holmes, and Inspector Jones pursue the villains along the River Thames and catch up with them. The treasure chest is empty. Jonathan Small is arrested and confesses his whole story. Watson and Mary Watson are engaged to be married. Set in London, 1988. Front entrance of 221B Baker Street, London. Set in London, 1888, the novel starts and ends with Sherlock Holmes taking cocaine. He complains that life is too tedious to endure if he does not have anything to stimulate his intellect. He thrives on difficult puzzles and demonstrates his skills by deducing precisely where Watson has been that morning and by correctly describing the origins of Watson's watch. Mary Morstan. Holmes is pleased when Miss Mary Morstan arrives to present the mystery of her missing father. She explains that Captain Morstan disappeared nearly 10 years ago on returning to England from the Andaman Islands. Every year since May 1882, she has received a single and lustrous pearl by post with no clue as to the sender. She approaches Holmes now because she has been sent a letter from an unknown friend asking her to be outside the Lyceum Theatre that evening. Thaddeus Sholto's home. Holmes and Watson accompany Mary, and the three are taken to Thaddeus Sholto's house. He tells them how Captain Morstan died of a heart attack following the argument with his father, Major John Sholto. He also explains how Major Sholto died of a foreign shock before telling his sons. Thaddeus and Bartholomew where the Agra treasure was hidden. Buried treasure. Thaddeus goes on to explain that Bartholomew found the treasure in a secret room at the top of Pondicherry Lodge. The treasure chest contained jewels of great value. Thaddeus insisted that this should be shared between the two brothers and Miss Morstan, which would make her the richest heiress in England. Bartholomew Sholto is found dead. When they are finally admitted to Pondicherry Lodge, Holmes and Watson discover that Bartholomew Sholto is dead in his room and the treasure is gone. The door is locked from the inside, and so Holmes looks for clues as to what has happened. Holmes makes a discovery. Holmes discovers footprints that must belong to a man with a wooden leg, a thorn in Bartholomew Sholto's scalp, which Holmes claims is poison, and small bare footprints. Detailed plot summary, Part 2. Buried treasure. Thaddeus goes on to explain that Bartholomew found the treasure in a secret room at the top of Pondicherry Lodge. The treasure chest contained jewels of great value. Thaddeus insisted that this should be shared between the two brothers and Miss Morstan, which would make her the richest heiress in England. Bartholomew Sholto is pounded. When they are finally admitted to Pondicherry Lodge, Holmes and Watson discover that Bartholomew Sholto is dead in his room and the treasure is gone. The door is locked from the inside, and so Holmes looks for clues as to what has happened. Holmes makes a discovery. Holmes discovers footprints that must belong to a man with wooden leg, a thorn in Bartholomew Sholto's scalp, which Holmes claims is poison, and small bare footprints. Sorry, dear students, it is repeated. Okay. On the roof that are stained with creosote. An arrest. Mr. Athelney Jones, a police detective, arrives and comes quickly to the conclusion that Thor is the murderer. He arrests him and takes him away. Meanwhile, Holmes sends Watson to collect a dog called Toby, who has the most amazing power of scent. Detailed plot summary part 3. Holmes has a theory. Holmes and Watson follow Toby as the tracks the creosote scent. Holmes explains his theory about the missing treasure and the murders. As they go, he deduces that the wooden-legged man must be Jonathan Small and that the thorn has been fired by an accomplice. The dog brings them to a house advertising boats for hire. Holmes learns from Mrs. Smith that her husband Mordecai owns a fast boat or launch called the Aurora, which he has hired to a wooden-legged man. Both men and the boat are missing. The Baker Street Irregulars. Holmes employs Wiggins and the Baker Street Irregulars, a group of young boys, to search for the Aurora. When they are unsuccessful, Holmes goes out disguised as a sailor and finds the boat in a yard. Chasing the Aurora. Mr. Athelney Jones arranges for a police boat to collect him. Watson and Holmes that night, when the Aurora launches onto the river Thames, the police boat gives chase. They approach the boat, and Small's accomplice, Tonga, lifts his hand to fire a dart. Holmes and Watson both shoot at him, and he falls into the river. Jonathan Small's wooden leg gets stuck in the mud, and he is easily caught. Jonathan Small confesses. Small confesses his story of meeting Mohammed Singh and Abdullah Khan, India. He explains how they promised him a share of treasure if he would help them to murder the merchant, Ahmed. The sign of the four represented their both oath along with Dost Akbar to share Ahmed's treasure. However, the men were arrested for the murder of Ahmed, and Small was sent to the Andaman Islands to serve his sentence. In an attempt to free the treasure, Small told Major Sholto and Captain Marston where it was hidden, promising them a fifth share. Sholto did not keep his word, however, and stole the treasure. Eventually, Small escaped and tracked down Sholto and the treasure, proving Holmes' theory to be accurate. The sign of the four characters overview. The novel is narrated by Dr. John Watson, who accompanies the major character Sherlock Holmes, a private detective. The novel begins with Holmes complaining of boredom. Miss Mary Marston arrives at Baker Street with a mystery regarding his missing father and an annual anonymous gift of pearls she has received for several years. Holmes is glad to take on the case as it will occupy his mind. Watson is also happy because he finds Miss Marston attractive. They are taken to Thaddeus Sholto, who explains how his father and Captain Marston died. His brother Bartholomew is found dead in his home, and then Holmes uses the clues to unravel the mystery of his murder and the hidden treasure. He rightly deduces that both Jonathan Small and his accomplice are involved. At the end of the novel, having solved the case, we see Holmes return to his state of boredom. Main characters: Sherlock Holmes, Dr. John Watson, Jonathan Small. Secondary characters: Mary Marston, Thaddeus Sholto, Mr. Athelney Jones. Minor characters: MacMurdo, the gatekeeper at Pondicherry Lodge, Mrs. Burstone, the housekeeper at Pondicherry Lodge, Mrs. Sherman, Toby's owner, Lal Rover, Sholto's butler, Mordecai Smith, owner of the Aurora, Mrs. Smith, and Jack Smith, wife and son of the owner of the Aurora, Wiggins, and the Baker Street Irregulars. Tonga, Mrs. Hudson, Holmes and Watson's landlady. Sherlock Holmes in The Sign of the Foe. The main character in the novel is the private detective Sherlock Holmes. He is presented through the viewpoint of his friend Dr. John Watson, the narrator of the story. Watson describes him as a sharp and highly intelligent individual. At the start of the novel, Holmes is injecting cocaine, which he argues he needs to numb his mind when there is nothing more interesting to occupy and challenge him. He is proud of his mental capacities and often dismissive towards those who he pursues to be less intelligent. In the opening chapters, he demonstrates his powers of observation and deduction with reference to his work on tobacco identification and by correctly explaining the history of Watson's watch. Holmes takes great pleasure in solving mysteries and outwitting others. In this story, he correctly determines how Jonathan Small and Tonga steal the Agra treasure from Sholto's house. He also has a strong sense of justice and at the end of the novel encourages Small to tell the truth so that he is not wrongly accused of Sholto's murder. Social and historical context. Police forces were established in England during the early 19th century. Constables tended to be unskilled working class men though there was a basic requirement for them to be literate and clear of any criminal history. The Sign of the Foe was published in 1890. To a certain extent, the character of Sherlock Holmes appealed to a sense of superiority amongst the upper social classes of Victorian Britain. They believed that the police were of inferior intellectual capabilities, and we see this stereotype in Mr. Athelney Jones Holmes' ability to solve the mystery where Mr. Jones isn't would amuse a contemporary audience. Twice as we ascend here, Holmes whipped his lens out of his pocket and carefully examined marks which appeared to me to be mere shapeless smudges of dust upon the cocoa nut matting which served as a stair carpet He walked slowly from step to step, holding the lamp and shooting quick glances to right and left. Dr. Watson in The Sign of the Foe. The story is written in the first person with Dr. Watson as narrator. He has lived with Sherlock Holmes for several years, during which time he has witnessed his companion at work on numerous difficult cases. He is loyal and at the start of the novel is concerned for his friend's well-being. He accompanies Holmes into potential dangerous situations and seems to take pleasure from the adventures he is led into. When he first meets Miss Mary Marston, Watson is struck by how attractive she is. Their growing love story is a subplot of the novel. A complication in the development of their romance comes in the form of the Agra treasure and Miss Marston's entitlement to it. Watson is very of being perceived as a mere Watson is wary of being perceived as a mere vulgar fortune seeker in the end. When the treasure has been lost, he feels able at last declared his love. Social and historical context. Dr. Watson belongs to the new middle classes of Victorian Britain. He is an army surgeon with a weak leg and a weaker banking account. It was not impossible for the different classes to mix, but social conventions at the time disapproved of people forming romantic connections with those of a different social class. We see the effects of this when Watson first meets Miss Marston. He is attracted to her but is certain that their unequal social and particularly financial statuses will stand in the way of a future for them together. I endeavored to cheer and amuse her by reminiscences of my adventures in Afghanistan. But to tell the truth, I was myself so excited at our situation and so curious as to our destination that my stories were slightly involved. To this day, she declares that I told her one moving anecdote as to how a musket looked into my tent at the dead of night and how I fired a double-barreled tiger cub at it. Jonathan Small in The Sign of the Poor. Although Jonathan Small only actually appears towards the end of the book, he is referred to by different characters throughout. The reader learns about him from the things other characters say about him and the ways they respond to him. Holmes identifies him as the wooden-legged man, and we learn that Major Sholto died from the shock of seeing Small's face at the window. Mrs. Smith, the boatkeeper's wife, describes him as ugly and outlandish. When Small is arrested and confesses in full to his crimes, he is revealed as cunning and manipulative character. He also shows the frightening side when he is angry. His involvement with the Sign of the Foe pact and the way he chases the treasure are key to the plot. Analyzing the evidence, Small had dropped his mask of stoicism, and all this came out in a wild whirl of words, while his eyes blazed and the handcuffs clanked together with the impassioned movement of his hands. I understand as I saw the fury and the passion of the man that it was no groundless or unnatural terror which had possessed Major Sholto when he first learned that the injured convict was upon his track. Miss Mary Marston in The Sign of the Four. Miss Mary Marston appears early in the novel and brings two mysteries to Sherlock Holmes. The first is the puzzle of her missing father, and the second is a series of strange gifts of beautiful pearls that she has received annually for the past 6 years. She remains calm and composed when they arrive to meet the mysterious letter writer at the Lyceum Theatre. The only time she appears upset is when Thaddeus Sholto announces that her father is dead. Even at this time, her response is self-possessed. She does not respond with great emotion, but sits down, her distress shown only in her white appearance. Watson admits that he is attracted to her and he presents a flattering image of gentle, collected, and modest woman. When reading about Miss Marston, as with all characters in this novel, it is important to remember that we are seeing her from Watson's point of view. Tori Sholto in The Sign of the Fourth. Tori Sholto is a strange looking character who lives in a richly decorated house. He is the one who has sent the letter of invitation to Miss Marston. Watson is annoyed with him when he announces Captain Marston's death in an offhand manner. Thaddeus tells the story of his father, Major John Sholto, who returned from India 11 years ago with a large sum of money and treasures. He explains how, on his father's deathbed, he confessed that Marston died after an argument about the treasure. Major Sholto regretted that he had left Miss Marston without her share of the wealth. Thaddeus explained how his father then saw a face at the window and died of shock before he could tell them where the treasure was hidden. Thaddeus seems to be more conscientious than his brother Bartholomew and is the one who has posted the pearls to Miss Marston when his brother is found dead. He worries rightly that he will be accused of murder. He is arrested by Mr. Athelney Jones but later set free when secure alibis are established. Athelney, next character. Mr. Athelney Jones is the official police inspector. He is presented as being considerably less capable than Holmes. Through the private detective allows the policeman to take the glory for solving the crime. He arrives at Pondicherry Lodge after the murder of Bartholomew Sholto is discovered. He quickly jumps to conclusions about the crime and arrests Thaddeus Sholto. Holmes is neither surprised nor concerned by this and promises Thaddeus that he will be able to clear him. Mr. Jones admires Holmes and happily agrees to follow his orders when his first arrests turn out to have alibis. The Sign of the Fourth themes overview. All evil and justice, first one. Second one is Victorian fear and third is empire and imperialism. Themes are ideas that run all the way through the literary text. By analyzing them, you can better understand the writer's intentions, what choices have they made, why, what are they trying to get you to think and feel. Analyzing themes allows you to write extensively about a literary text. In the sign of the four, there are many themes which could be analyzed. For example, evil and justice, Victorian fear, empire and imperialism. These themes are presented through the characters and the layered plot. Other ideas that deal with conclude betrayal, greed, and chance. The Sign of Four is a detective story written and set in late Victorian times. In his Sherlock Holmes story, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle establishes the conventions of the modern detective novel in which a rational and intellectual central character investigates and ultimately solves a mystery. Evil and justice in the sign of the four. The themes of evil and justice are closely related in this novel. Evil is present in the form of the murders and crimes that are committed. It is also embodied by the character of Tonga, who is depicted as inherently savage and malicious. Justice is sought on behalf of Miss Mary Marston. Thaddeus Sholto feels that Miss Marston has been treated unjustly by his father, Major John Sholto, who kept the Agra treasure and kept the facts of her father's death secret. Jonathan Small is upset by the injustice that he will never enjoy the treasure that he believes is rightly his, despite the fact that he acquired it by murdering a man. Holmes is fair and insists that Small will not be accused of murdering Bartholomew Sholto. How is the theme of evil and justice shown in the novel will be the question asked about this. In the sign of the four Conan Doyle shows the theme of evil and justice through Miss Mary Marston and her missing father, the character of Tonga, the sense of injustice that Jonathan Small feels in losing the treasure. Victorian fear in the sign of the four. In this novel, a number of Victorian fears are presented. We see the fear of the other or forgiveness presented through the character of Tonga, who is depicted as a savage and inherently evil. Conan Doyle also shows fear of darkness. Much of the novel is set at night time when murder, theft, and betrayal occur. The Victorian preoccupation with social class and the fear of overstepping social boundaries is also evident and is represented potential inheritance. Victorian Empire meets imperialism. This novel is set against the backdrop of the Victorian Empire. The treasure that is stolen repeatedly through the novel comes from India, which at the time of story was under British rule. Through the treasure and the luxurious decoration of Sholto's house, Conan Doyle associates luxury with the empire. There is also a sense of threat to the empire that is conveyed through the mention of the uprising of 1857. In addition to this, the appearance in London of Tonga, the islander, could be perceived as threatening. Empire and imperialism in the sign of the four. This novel is set against the backdrop of the Victorian Empire. The treasure that is stolen repeatedly through the novel come from India. That has been seen previous already. We have seen this part. Now see the next part. Use of form in the sign of the 4. Form, that is style here. When referring to form in the sign of the 4, you can refer to the type of text is the style of writing, the genre. Detective story. Arthur Conan Doyle did not invent the detective story but built on conventions already established by Edgar Allan Poe in his story The Murders in the Rue Morgue. Conan Doyle said that the problem and its solution must from the theme of a detective story. Conventions of this form include a rational and intelligent detective, a companion for the detective usually less intelligent than the detective, a mystery, sometimes involving murder, clues to the solution which the reader can enjoy as a puzzle built up of tension, a satisfactory resolution in which the mystery is solved, evidence and explanation of the form used. The sign of the 4 begins with a young woman, Mary Marston, coming to ask Sherlock Holmes for his help locating her father, who had mysteriously disappeared some years previously, and to solve the mystery of some pearls which she had been receiving annually in the post. The plot deepens when Holmes, Watson, and Miss Marston are taken to Thaddeus Sholto's house only to discover that his twin brother Bartholomew has been murdered. Conan Doyle presents Sherlock Holmes as a rational and highly intelligent character, while his companion Watson is admiring but often baffled by Holmes' intellect. The book begins with the explained disappearance of Mary Marston's father and the riddle of the unexplained pearls which arrive in the post, leading the reader to question whether these are clues. The murder is then introduced, and the bumbling official detective Mr. Athelney Jones sets off on the wrong track. The tension of the plot mounts as Holmes and Watson investigate and finally solve the mysteries of who killed Bartholomew Sholto, who sent Miss Marston to the pearls, and what happened to Mary Marston's father. Use of structure in the sign of the 4. The novel uses 12 chapters, each of them titled, with many of them ending with a hook that encourages the reader to continue. The first chapter establishes the main characters, and the second chapter introduces the mystery. The following chapters added complications and build tension until Holmes proposes his hypothesis in chapter 7. In the following chapter, suspense is built for the reader as the detective and police give chase and eventually track down Jonathan Small. Finally, the reader learns that Holmes' complicated explanation of how Bartholomew Sholto was killed is correct. When writing about structure, think about how is the text put together, what is significant about this, how does it reflect the themes of the text. And what is the overall effect of the structure? Evidence and explanation of the structure used. Story arc. This story follows a classic three-part plot. In the first act, the protagonist is drawn into conflict of danger. In the second act, there are obstacles in the way of goal. In the final act, everything is resolved. In this novel, we learn that Holmes actually longs to be drawn into conflict. He wishes for a puzzle or mystery to occupy his restless mind. In Act 1, he is approached by Miss Mary Marston, who enlists Holmes and Watson to help her solve her mystery. The second act is the build-up of tension when they enter Pondicherry Lodge and learn about the treasure and deaths of the men who have tried to own it. In the third act, the police chase is successful and the mystery is solved. Holmes returns to his initial positions of taking drugs. Storytelling. The main narrator of this novel is Dr. John Watson. However, the story is also told through the dialogue of other characters. For example, in chapter 4, Thaddeus Sholto tells the story of Captain Marston's disappearance and explains how he and his brother found the treasure. Later, when they find Bartholomew Sholto murdered, Holmes explains his hypothesis. His explanation is long and appears as a story within the story. The same techniques of storytelling through dialogue is used later when Jonathan Small's confession still supports Holmes' theory, adding few extra details. The reader's impression of Sherlock Holmes as astute and intelligent is therefore confirmed. How to analyze structure. How important is the overall structure of this novel? There is a clear beginning, middle, and end to the story. A problem, a hypothesis, and solution. The mystery is challenged to the readers as well as the detective. Watson's story provides a frame for Thaddeus' tale about his father for Holmes. Hypothesis and small confession at the end. It creates tension by building up mystery. Then, in the third section, revealing that Holmes' hypothesis is correct. When Small's confession confirms Holmes' theory, the reader has a sense of admiration for the detective and satisfaction that he has solved the mystery. Use of language in The Sign of the Four. Conan Doyle uses the narrative voice of Dr. Watson to present the characters and scenes of this novel. This allows the reader to feel close to the action and to follow the plot as it unfolds. His language is occasionally romantic and philosophical, though much of the story is told through direct speech. Watson's narrative frames large sections of dialogue which are used to reveal the mystery of the sign of the four. Students, use of language. In the sign of the four, Conan Doyle uses the narrative voice of Dr. Watson we have seen, but when analyzing the language, Conan Doyle has used him to examine words and phrases, think about the sorts of words he chooses, positive, negative, descriptive, explore layers of meaning. What else could a phrase refer to or suggest? Notice any literary techniques, simile, metaphor, alliteration. Explain the effects of the language used. How does it make you feel? How to analyze language? Here is an example Conan Doyle's use of dialogue. It is a section from chapter 8. When Holmes and Watson have followed Toby to the Smith's home. Dear little chap, said Holmes strategically. What a rosy-cheeked young rascal. Now, Jack, is there anything you would like? The youth pondered for a moment. I would like a Ceylon, said he. Nothing you would like better. I would like to sail in better, the prodigy answered after some thought. Here you are then, Catch. A fine child, Mrs. Smith. Lord bless you, sir, is that. And forward he gets almost too much for me to manage, especially when my man is of a days at a time. We can analyze this section and explore how the language creates a sense of character. Dear little chap, we know Holmes is playing a part here, complimenting Mrs. Smith on her son. His dialogue is formal and patronizing. I would like a Celine. Canon Doyle replicates the real speech by showing how the boy drops the G at the end of the word shilling. His contrast with Holmes' use of standard English and suggests that the boy is of a lower social category. Here you are, then catch the imperative. Catch shows the reader that Holmes has thrown a coin to the boy. The reader knows that Holmes' intention is to appear generous and trustworthy to Mrs. Smith. Lord bless you, sir. Again, Conan Doyle captures the speech patterns of the lower social classes, showing how Mrs. Smith says Lord instead of Lord. Her use of the formal mode of address in Sir also shows a recognition of Holmes' higher social status. Conan Doyle uses dialogue to mirror social conventions of the time and to establish relationship between the speakers. So, students, that is all about this novel. The first part we have seen now. In the next part, we are going to see the next part later on. Till then, bye bye. Take care. Stay safely at home.